So let's begin. Hi, everybody out there on Zoom land too. Let's begin this session the way that we've been beginning all of them, which is with the 1 minute meditation. For anybody who wasn't here in the other sessions, I've led a couple of these retreats now, and something that I found was a great takeaway for people is that there are numerous people who said, "Oh, I used to meditate and I stopped meditating," or "How do I set up a meditation practice?" or "I don't have time for meditation practice." So for a lot of those people, I say, "Well, you can meditate for 1 minute." Everybody has an extra minute. Take away one of the times that you scrolled Instagram or checked your mail or something, and there's a meditation session. And it also has a huge effect on your mind, especially right before like a meeting or going to work. So let's just do that. Settle yourself into a meditation position. And again, for some of there's a couple of new people. So I wanted to share one beautiful tip that Venerable Renee reminded us of recently with your posture. Um, first of all, you can put your feet flat on the floor if you're in a chair, or cross-legged with your seat raised if you're sitting like that. Spine straight, little space between your arms. Relax your shoulders, your neck. And then with your hands, typically we people put our right hand on top of the left and touch our thumbs. And there's this beautiful symbolism that the left hand represents interdependence, emptiness. The right hand represents compassion, action. And then the thumbs touching represents concentration. If you get used to that, it's such an automatic reminder when you sit down to meditate to combine all those things in your practice as you put your hands in your lap. It used to bother me because I'm left-handed. So there's this thing like the right hand's always dominating the left hand, and I feel a little annoyed as a lefty. But now I just use this symbolism, right? Because the other symbolism is that your left hand is more like your delusion, like seeing mistaken view of reality and or conventional reality and ultimate reality, or mistaken or correct view, depending on how some people explain it. But I like this view of interdependence, compassion, and concentration. So tilt your head down slightly and mostly close your eyes, which helps you go inward without falling asleep. Then you can touch your tongue to the roof of your mouth. There's also this great tip from Thich Nhat Hanh, who says, sometimes happiness is the cause of your smile, and sometimes your smile is the cause of your happiness. So an extra element of meditation posture can be just to slightly smile. And so as you start off with a motivation, what a wonderful weekend. We are going on this adventure of exploring the lamrim in a way that's accessible to people that aren't even Buddhists, who don't necessarily believe in karma, rebirth, other realms of existence, but want to benefit from as authentic as possibly practicing analytical meditation, the stages of the path. And so whether you're a non-Buddhist or newcomer learning, or a very experienced person learning new ways to work with your mind and to explain the Dharma to others, what a wonderful way to spend a weekend together. There's nothing better we could be doing with our time. So we have that motivation to bring out our best qualities, that kind of simple colloquial definition of meditation, and to deepen our relationships and to build a better world, and to be able to figure out what it is we can each do to build a better world. And then you can feel some sense of refuge if you are religious, spiritual. You can think of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, or Jesus, Mary, depending on the traditions you are raised in. But we talked about the secular forms of refuge that are also available to Buddhists: refuge in all other beings and their capacity for good, and refuge in our own mind, the fundamental goodness within our own mind that all of us share. And then just gently steer your mind to your breath. And again, I'll share this tip Venerable Renee shared recently with us, which is that you can focus on your nostrils if you want to strengthen your concentration. You can focus on your chest if you want to expand your openness. And you can focus on your abdomen if you want to uh, deepen your groundedness. So just choose one place to focus depending on where you might benefit today. And then we'll focus on our breath just for 1 minute. And when thoughts, feelings, distractions, sensations in our body arise, just let them pass by and steer your mind back to your breath. 1 minute. And then you can come out of the meditation, which is the last little pro tip is quit while you're ahead with meditation. Very, very good advice for meditation or for lots of other things in life. Because then it's so great to end the meditation session while you still wanted to meditate more, where you say, oh, shucks, I could have stayed in that for a few more minutes. That's a pro tip on how to develop a good relationship to meditation. So today we're going to go over the two topics we're at now in the lamrim. One is called suffering, which I call "Am I the most important person in the universe?" Just a little a little better marketing than suffering. And then renunciation. But first, I wanted to address Susan had a question afterwards that I thought it'd be nicer to yesterday that I thought it'd be nicer to address in the group, which is what to do with physical pain in meditation. And so, by the way, I didn't mention this at the beginning of teaching, but I'm your friend, I'm not a high Dharma teacher or anything like that. You know what those people are like, and you have them visit here regularly. So I think it goes without saying that I'm I'm a peer, I'm your Dharma friend, and this is just learning from somebody who's at the same level. I think all of you could come up here and give your insights. That would be just as valuable, if not more. So I like to mention that. I don't like to call myself a teacher. I like to say I'm a teaching assistant. You know how in college there'd be like the students who took the class the semester before who are then helping out. That's more like I am. So I just wanted a reminder about that. So yeah, what to do. I just say that because I'm going to talk about what to do with physical pain, but I'm just sharing that, from my own experience and how it intersects with the Dharma and my own life. Um, my understanding of what to do with physical pain is that it fits into every single stage of the path. It's not, it's another mental experience, just like everything else. And this isn't to deny the reality of pain, the quote, reality of pain. I think a couple questions yesterday are, what's real? And pain is just like the color red or, middle C, on the piano, if you play middle C or an other instrument, there is something out there, but it's our mind interpreting it that there's no red objectively out there in the world. It's a psychological phenomenon in our mind. Same thing with middle C. It's just vibrating air, silent. Vibrating air is silent, but our mind creates a psychological illusion, if you want to call it, hallucination of a sound. Pain's the same way. And I say that to put it on equal. It doesn't mean that pain doesn't exist, but to come into some deeper understanding of how perception works. Um, it helps to know that there are people who lack the neurological equipment for pain. Have any of you ever heard of these people? Yeah, their life is a total nightmare because they can die from one cut because they don't know they're bleeding. It doesn't hurt. They don't realize they're bleeding, and they can just bleed to death. So, at firstly, we think it would be nice to not feel pain, but it turns out the people who don't feel pain, it's a nightmare. It's adaptive to feel pain, and life's really dangerous if you don't. So it does serve this evolutionary purpose, but it's not real, except, quote, real, in the way you say it exists outside of our minds. It's not real except in a psychological sense. Some of you know that I was raised as a Christian Scientist. Um, so I have a particularly deep insight into the mental nature of pain because from the day I was born, I was raised with my parents and my church told me that not only does pain not exist, but injury and illness don't even exist. It goes a bit too extreme in Christians. I'm not a Christian Scientist, but I was raised as one. And so whenever I got hurt or sick, we had no recourse to any medical care. We didn't take vaccines also, although I am now vaccinated. Um, so whenever I got hurt or sick as a kid, my parents, my Sunday school teachers would tell me, it's not real. And they'd give me various prayers to do. And honestly, it worked. Like a lot of the time, it really, really worked. My cut didn't just, disappear like in one of those movies or something, but the pain would disappear very, very quickly. Most of the time, most of the time. Um, and there were prayers we did too. There's this thing called the scientific statement of being in Christian Science. Does anybody know about Christian Science? It's sort of not that well known anymore. But it goes, there's no life, truth, intelligence, nor substance in matter. All is infinite mind in its infinite manifestation, for God is all in all. Spirit is immortal truth, matter is mortal error. Spirit is the real and eternal, matter is the unreal and temporal. Spirit is God, as man is his image and likeness. Therefore, man is not material, he is spiritual. You see how easy I could say that? I must have said it 10,000 times or more. It's funny, I don't think I've said it in years, but it just comes out. That's what I'd say when I get sick. um, some of you know, so Christian Science is known actually for um, not going to the doctor. But when you heard that prayer, I bet some of you, how many of you have studied tenets, this topic in the schools of emptiness? When you study the four schools of emptiness, some people. So when you study that, the third school, like the almost highest one that we're taught is almost highest. Some people say it's the highest, and they have a good argument. Um, in that school, they say the same thing. Like in Christian Science, they say there's no matter at all. That matter is a reflection of mind, like a kind of shadow of mind. And this mind-only school in Buddhism is actually quite similar. So I'm actually very, very grateful for having been raised Christian Scientist because it was a very good preparation for Tibetan Buddhism and the mind-only school in particular, which I'm very fond of. And actually, sometime if I ever come back, I wouldn't. It would be fun to do a course on that. Like this, I've done done this a few different times on the an experiential approach to those and a more scientific approach to the schools of emptiness. But anyway, when I was a kid, I couldn't do anything except just use my mind when I got hurt. So I remember, particularly, I remember when I was 10 getting in a really bad skateboarding accident, like scrapes and bruises. I don't know anybody who skateboarded, like you get really hurt skateboarding. And I was just laying on the sidewalk, just in excruciating pain. But then, saying that prayer and trying to dissolve it, just kind of let it go. And I remember this woman coming by, very nice, she's like, "Oh, are you okay? Can I help you?" And I just said, "Leave me alone. I'm fine. I'm fine." As a Christian Scientist, when you say I'm fine, like you should probably call 911. Like that's like a cry. That's a cry for help. Um, but it would work. Like the pain did go away. Sometimes it would take minutes or, sometimes hours, but we do have control over our mind as to how much we feel pain, how severe it is, and how we relate to it. Um, I have a very high tolerance for pain because I was raised that way. And when I go to the doctor, my wife actually makes me explain. She's like, explain to them that when you say it hurts a little, that's the same as me saying I'm in excruciating pain. Um, so I was actually really angry at my parents later in college because it's one thing to say pain isn't real. And it's another thing to say, oh, measles isn't real or a broken leg isn't real. Those are genuine phenomena. But I learned a lot from Christian Science, and I'm grateful for being raised that way because it teaches you everything we experience is in our mind. Although they take it to an extreme that I don't think is no longer accurate at a certain point. So then, when you come into dealing with it from a Buddhist perspective rather than a Christian Science perspective, I'm not trying to give you a Christian Science lecture here. The first level is mindfulness, right? Just to become aware of it. And I think this is one of the good tricks with pain is that actually focusing on it, like putting your attention onto the pain instead of trying to ignore it, can be very, very effective in getting rid of it. It's the same thing where, like, it's a very good trick in mindfulness meditation where you actually invite the thoughts in. You actually sit there and you say, bring it on. Like, okay, thoughts, I'm here. I'm ready to watch you. Like, just come. I want to see you. And I'm just going to let you pass by. Funnily enough, like that trick with thoughts, often then your mind just clears. Like then the thoughts, when you invite the thoughts, all of a sudden they don't come. And so it's similar with pain, where you actually bring your mind to the pain, like where is it? How does it feel? Like and loosen, don't you have to really loosen up it, like the tightness is what makes it a lot worse. And interestingly, like when you bring your mind right onto the pain, it can dissolve and lessen. And the things I'm telling you are taught in hospitals too. They use meditation and visualization in hospitals even 25 years ago. People were using it. Um, the topic of the precious life, you know, that help that you can think about pain there too, is that, well, I'm still quite lucky, I do have some pain. But many other people having much worse pain. It shades into compassion quite quickly. But when I have a little bit of pain, sometimes I remember my aunt who she had an operation that messed up one of her nerves, and I never knew anybody with this level of pain. Everything hurt everywhere, all the time, if she was touched anywhere. So my grandfather, who was actually quite a gruff person in his life, became so tender because every morning he would cover her entire body with cotton. Like, because even her clothes hurt when it rubbed against her anywhere. So he'd cover her whole body with cotton and then like put on her clothes, and then still she was in pain, but not quite as bad. So that, the precious life topic actually jumps right to compassion quite quickly because you compare yourself to other people and you say, well, okay, they do have it much worse. His Holiness the Dalai Lama talks about this. Somehow, a little story he told about how compassion combats pain and illness. I think about all the time. He said he was I think he had a very upset stomach, and he was driving through India, and then looking out the window at all the other people with missing limbs and other and more serious illnesses and disabilities. Um, he generated compassion. He's like, oh, I'm feeling pain and they're feeling a lot worse. And it really, I mean, has anybody had that be effective for them? I mean, it's worked for me very deeply, very often when I feel pain. It reminds me, like, oh, yeah, I hadn't realized there's, you know, uh, thousands of people, millions of people have stomach aches and flus and broken bones and so on right now. So it's nice to think right now, like right now, how many people just broke a leg or uh, got the flu and so on, got COVID, got AIDS. um, Impermanence, the topic of impermanence is really good with pain because of course things are changing. And something I talked to a doctor once, I said, what's it like being a doctor? And he said, well, it's sort of like it's kind of one of two things. Like either people have all these chronic problems I can't help with really at all, like diabetes and so on. Or he said a lot of the time with normal problems people come in with, it doesn't matter what I do because they're going to get better no matter what. Because people tend to come in on the worst day. People tend to come in when they're the sickest. So then he's like, it doesn't matter what I do because they're going to get better. And so that's a nice thing to think about with impermanence is often when things are the very worst, you're at that, it's about to turn, it's about to turn in the other direction. There's no guarantee, obviously, for that, but quite often, like that is the case, and then that can be comforting too. Um, the topic of cause and effect that comes next. Why do we feel pain? How do we feel pain? Um, and what are the causes to feel less pain? Or is there something we can do about it? Often, like pains in our body are actually due to insufficient exercise. I know sometimes I feel like if I miss yoga, like for 3 weeks, I feel like I'm starting to die. Like honestly, my body starts to get like these creaks and aches and freezes up. And so there is that level of realizing for certain pains, there are things we can do about it. And it's really important to take care of ourselves, go for walks and stretching. I think we all know this, but in our society, there's a lot of things that will keep us sitting on the couch, which is like one of the worst things for you to just sit on your couch. Um, the purification, um, which I call self-forgiveness, where you have the light that lets go of the things you regret, that is traditionally also done for physical pain. So if you do that in a Buddhist way, like a Vajrasattva purification, that's often helps with dissolving pain. Those visualizations where you send light to injuries are used in cancer wards. Like I first learned it, I wasn't even Buddhist. This was like 30 years ago. There was a guy I was working with he was young and he had cancer. And he told me they taught him in the cancer ward to use visualization, to send light to his tumors. That wasn't the only treatment. They were also applying all the normal medical treatments. But he had a very aggressive type of cancer. And at the time he said, "Oh, I may only have a year or two to live." He's still alive. I actually looked it up the other day because I was thinking about this. He's still alive and thriving. I don't know which had the effect, but still, there's even scientifically, validated studies on visualization that it does actually help with illness, not just pain, but illness itself. Um, and you're talking to someone who's quite skeptical. I was quite annoyed and skeptical at the Christian Science perspective, but still, it does actually have an effect. It's just you don't want to rely completely on visualization prayer. Um, And then the topics of for today obviously relate a lot to pain of suffering. It's like the very first part of studying suffering is pain is inevitable and natural. And boy, do how many people experience it. Um, it's inevitable, at least in the state that we're in. But there are ways to become, free of some and maybe all forms of pain, if you believe in enlightenment. And then renunciation, which we'll get to today, um, which is people can get very angry when they're in pain, right? In fact, almost always when someone's very angry, it's pain. My daughter is every day, every school day, my daughter comes home and she's so upset about her Mandarin teacher because the Mandarin teacher is very, very mean to them, very rude, very cruel. Something you don't see as much these days in school, especially a progressive school. And every time I tell her something is going on in her life, she may have some physical pain, issues with her family, partner, children. People don't act like that just for no reason. And so with renunciation, we realize that about everybody and especially ourselves, right? Like we stop blaming things outside ourselves for our pain and admit that our delusions are what cause us to suffer. Now, it doesn't mean your pain disappears, but quite often people get angry. Um, People say they're like fighting cancer, but a lot of people say that language isn't helpful because you're suffering from cancer. You're experiencing cancer, and it's not something you can like win. It's not a fight. It's something you're experiencing, and you may get through it. You may overcome it. But we have a quite violent language we use in our society that isn't always helpful. But yeah, people can get. I'll tell you a ridiculous story. It's kind of like a famous Buddhist story, but there's a real story that happened to my father-in-law. So I was actually married twice. This is my first father-in-law. So his wife was pregnant, and his wife was going to iron some things at home, and she tried to get out the ironing board, but the ironing board fell on her, and she fell down, and was injured and was worried about the baby. So he came over, the father-in-law. He ripped the ironing board off the wall and started beating it up. He's like punching the ironing board, broke it in half, threw it out the door. Is it the ironing board's fault? That she got hurt. But that's like, I mean, this is the same story, right? We say, oh, does the stick, we tell it in the Buddhism, right? Did the stick hurt you or did the person hurt you? Well, is it actually the person? Is it the anger? But I really like the story about the ironing board because it's quite vivid and it's something that really happened, to somebody I know. But that's what it's like with blame when we start to blame, other things. It's also if you blame people for like, you got me sick. My daughter sometimes is angry. She's like, you got me sick. I'm like, I don't know. How did you get sick? Can you really blame your illness on anybody? Um, So anyway, there's with compassion, when you now after suffering and renunciation, we get to compassion, as its own topic. And that's where, the story is about His Holiness, where compassion is a very powerful engine. Our pain is a very powerful engine of compassion. And it really does ease pain when you use it to generate compassion for people feeling the same. And then there are these other specific techniques we know, like Tonglen, where you actually breathe in. If you know someone else is suffering, you breathe in their pain, you have it hit the solid core of your delusions at your heart and explode into light and destroy your delusions and their pain like all at once. And also a technique called universalizing, which we won't have time for this time. But if I come back and we do the topics of love, compassion, emptiness, I'd like to spend a session on universalizing, where when you have pain, you wish for others not to have it, right? So if you have a little, like say you stub your toe, you instantly think, oh, may nobody else stub their toe, may nobody else break a leg. It's this instant way to kind of make exponential um, compassion and love come from pain. Then, of course, the last topic of emptiness with pain is you try to find the pain. Where is the pain? You know, is it in your muscles? Is it in the neurons? Is it in my bones? Is it in my mind? Um, and remember, like, I'm not saying it's not there at all, but it's quite subtle, you know, what it actually is. And um, it is a mental phenomenon. Like when you're cut, there's no negative sensation inherently associated with being cut. But because of our evolution and the way our neurons work and our brains work, we feel pain. But then, depending on how your mind is, if you start thinking, oh God, why me? I'm so stupid. Why did I do that? This is horrible. It gets worse. Your pain, I think we all know it gets worse if you, and it can be eased a bit by, you know, being gentler on yourself. The last thing I wanted to mention is that over time, meditation does change your body substantially. You know, they say it creates a suppleness of mind and body. It's often the phrase that they use. And I have found that to be true in my own kind of modest practice that um, my body hurt for about, like the first 5 years I was meditating, and then it stopped. You know, in general, it stopped and it started being able to sit for like a few hours. Um, and also other things changed, like sensitivity to hot and cold and pain also. Um, but also, when I go to the doctors now, I have to warn them because my heart rate is like 42 beats per minute now. And it used to be like 68 or something, like a kind of normal. And I'm not particularly, you know, an out athlete or anything like that. I'm almost certain it just came from meditation. I think it was just slowly over the years. Um, so yeah, I think meditation does change your. They say meditation changes your body, and I noticed a little bit in my own body too. So, anyways, I wanted to go on at length about that because I think it is a really interesting question about pain, and it does relate to every single topic of the lamrim, and we all sure as heck experience it. So, uh, I hope that was helpful and balanced. You know, it's not meant to deny pain in any way, but to more subtly look into it. I've had pain that felt unbearable, and I know many of you have, and we know people who have. Okay, so let's go into this topic of suffering, or as I like to put it, am I more important than anyone else in the universe? Which I'll explain where I got that phrase from in a moment. I didn't make it up. But this topic is about why we don't feel good. You know, you can ask yourself that question when you don't feel good, or if you're not feeling good right now. Why don't you feel good? Now, the lessons that we hear in our society are generally at odds with the Buddhist perspective. It's the words that people say that hurt us, the things that people do, the things that happen to us, um, the things we wish would happen to us that don't. There's all this long list of in Buddhism of different types of suffering. Um, but from the perspective, when we get to this topic, it's not any of these things. It's our own minds. So it's not any action, not even the things Donald Trump did yesterday, or Vladimir Putin did yesterday, or your boss, your partner, your parents. And this is where, you know, we start to get to the root of Buddhist practice, and it's a little uncomfortable. Um, but what we say is that we suffer because of our mind's reaction to events, not the events themselves. And so this is the Buddha's first teaching. But it's not the first teaching in the lamrim. I think it's very, very difficult advanced teaching, actually. Um, it's a testament to the people the Buddha was teaching at the time that they were ready for this as their first teaching. Um, but this is the order in the lamrim where suffering comes kind of in the middle. And it's the axis. It's like the axis around which the path turns. Is very, very skillful and beautiful the way the lamrim is structured, where we start to understand what's at the root of unpleasantness. And a lot of you already know, of course, the answer to what's at the root. And that comes to the story of why I call this, am I more important than anyone else in the universe? So I went to see Robert Thurman. I'm a big fan of Robert Thurman. He's one of my heroes and teachers. And he gave a wonderful lecture in Berkeley, just like the first year I was a Buddhist, like 25 years ago. And it was just so lovely how he put this. He says, you know what our problem is? He says, we think out of everyone in the whole world, maybe out of everyone that's ever lived, everyone in the whole universe, every living being, we're just a little bit more important. And that really rang true to me. And I also want to quickly add that that can also manifest as feeling a little bit less important. It's actually the very same delusion of bias, but what gets to the root of our suffering is sense of separateness, and then the sense of bias that some people are more important than another, and in particular ourselves feeling more important or less important. So I think a lot of us, this word suffering isn't the greatest English word. It's quite unfortunate with Buddhism because we just don't have the right words in our language. Like there's so many subtle words for this in other languages. Unsatisfying is I think is a better word for this life, because like I was talking to Rick Hanson. Anyone know Rick Hanson? He's a great author. He wrote a great book called Buddha's Brain, one of the best books about neuroscience and Buddhism. And we had this really nice 2 hour conversation, and I gave him a book on bodhicitta. He was so beloved. And then at the end he said, you know was this suffering? He's like, was this conversation we had suffering? It's like, what do you think? I said, no, I don't think so, actually. It's just not the right word for it in English. Yeah, things may be unsatisfying, discomfortable, the inevitability of problems, that things don't last. We'll go into the different types of suffering. But I think something a lot of people ask if they're introduced to Buddhism and that, oh, life is suffering, is why think about it? Like, what's the point of thinking about suffering? We already experience a lot of it, and it's not pleasant. So why think about it more? So one way, like we were just talking about, is to generate compassion. Um, and it's technically a more advanced practice, but it's one that in general we bring up in every topic. If we're drawing from the Mahayana Buddhist tradition, in that motivation in the beginning, it's always of compassion. Um, and that attitude really needs to infuse every meditation. Um, Thinking about suffering helps us accept reality as it is. That at its core, what Buddhism says is that aligning your mind with reality is what makes you at peace, and even happy when difficult things happen. And I think there's an extraordinary truth to that. Something I often tell people if they ask me about Buddhism is that Buddhism doesn't guarantee that you'll be free from problems, but only that you can be calm and even happy through whatever problems you inevitably face. So Buddhism, it categorizes all these forms of suffering of suffering, which I like to joke comes from the Department of Redundancy Department. Anybody ever hear that joke? My dad used to make that joke. Suffering of suffering, which is just every ordinary form of suffering that we have. Then the suffering of change, what we call pleasures, which is like really a downer, I think, when we first hear that. Um, but it's just that things change, they wear out. Um, the bigger one is our mind changes. You enjoy something the previous day, you don't like it the next. A couple of us were talking about this with respect to music. So, maybe a song you haven't heard in a long time, that you used to love. You play it again and it sounds great. Then you play it again, it's a little less great, and then it starts to drive you crazy. Isn't it strange how our minds work? That's the suffering of change. Um, And of course, the last part of suffering changes. We lose everything at death, even because sometimes things don't wear out. Sometimes we do like things for our whole life, but still, our life does end and we lose everything. Then there's this all-pervasive suffering, which I was talking with Venerable Shankar with. It's hard to understand and explain, and there's many different explanations for it. The simple way that I explain it, like in this sequence, in a secular perspective, is that it's the suffering that comes from feeling self-centered or even just separate is the ultimate cause of our suffering. That you can't suffer if you don't think there's a separate president, making decisions that are harming a separate me and immigrants and so many other people. But there's a lot of different ways of approaching that topic. There wouldn't be any point to think about suffering if there wasn't any antidote. That's the good news, and there is. So the first thing you try to do, and again, I think a lot of you already know this, is try to understand the causes of suffering in our delusions. It's very, very powerful to understand the definitions of these delusions because they hijack English words that have different meanings. So you have to learn a different definition. Attachment, sometimes called desire. I kind of like the word craving. That's exaggerating the positive in something and thinking if you get it, it's gonna make you happy forever, solve all your problems. If you think about this with relationships in particular, like it comes to life, you're like, ooh, if I get that person, if they're in my life. Um, Anger has a very specific definition, and we'll talk more about it because their anger does serve a powerful purpose when we feel the strong feelings. But the diluted form of anger that we learn about in Buddhism is very specific. It's exaggerating the negative in an object and wanting to harm it, like very specific. And if any of you ever get angry at your partner, spouse, I think you understand this. It's completely ridiculous, right? Like the dishes are piled up or something, and and I'm like, oh, and I have all these negative feelings towards my wife. And this is what is so nice about knowing the definition, because then I just look at my mind, like, what are you doing? Like, I can't see one drop of good in my wife over this trivial, stupid thing that she, by the way, probably has some very good reason of having been too busy to do the dishes. And yet I'm angry about it. So I think it helps so much to know these definitions and to be able to bring them to mind when you feel a delusion of anger, to remember what it is, exaggerating the negative and wanting to harm. Um, and then ignorance. Ignorance is just this vast topic that has many layers of how to explain it. One is just the ignorance of what makes us happy and what makes us suffer, just not knowing the basics of how to be happy in life and how not to cause problems. But then ultimately, more ultimately, it's failing to see our ultimate interdependence with everyone and everything. You see this with nature. We often say, I'm going out to nature, after this retreat's over. We're in nature right now. We're part of nature. Even a person in a apartment in New York City is still part of nature. And when you think you're not part of nature, that's when you can start to exploit it, harm it, throw out your plastic bottles, kill the turtles, all of those things. If you realize you're always part of nature, then you suffer less and you cause less harm. So there are many, many antidotes to suffering. It's actually the entire path. But the earlier ones are mindfulness, like we were talking about, is watching the mind. What is mindfulness? Doesn't necessarily have an ethical foundation, as we talked about earlier. It's a important part of the Buddhist path or contemplative path. But what it cultivates is non-reactivity. It helps you to not react to what goes through your mind, to just watch what goes through your mind without reacting to it. Accepting impermanence. We already talked about this a little bit with respect to physical pain, but suffering it comes and goes, and it's inevitable, but also it's often inevitable that it will diminish and disappear. Um, Seeing the faults of anger and attachment uh, is particularly good. Um, does anybody want to mention one of the faults of anger or attachment? It's more interactive. What do people see as the faults of anger? Anybody? Exactly. That is exactly what I was thinking. Because I forget that a lot. And I bet some of you do too. Yeah, what about you? Oh, sorry. He said it doesn't feel very good. Sorry, we should have used the microphone. The gentleman in the back said anger doesn't feel good. I just had the same conversation a couple of years ago with Venerable Renee. I was having trouble with anger. And I talked to him, I had a conversation with him, and I said, how do you deal with anger? And he said, oh, anger is the easy one, isn't it? Because anger doesn't feel good. Just what you said. And then I kind of played it cool. I was like, oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Then after I got off the phone with him, I took out my notebook in huge letters. I wrote, anger doesn't feel good. You know? It took me a really long time to absorb that. And it was kind of, a lot of times we learn something when we become embarrassed. That's why in school they kind of call you out and you make mistakes. So I was a little bit embarrassed in front of my teacher. But that was how I really absorbed that anger doesn't feel good. Um, it's such an important lesson. Um, and I've heard there's so much to say about this topic about anger because anger is a signal that something needs to change. It's not nothing. It's not total nonsense. It comes about for a reason. And in fact, it's it's can see quite clearly if you don't let the diluted part of it run away with your mind because anger is telling you something needs to change, right? It's not nonsense. Um, but then on top of it, we add this delusion that it's all bad and I want to harm it. I want to harm the thing that's causing me pain. Tarbrock is really good. Tarbrock, is an incredible teacher. She is really, really good with this topic. And she says, if you're feeling angry, it is a delusion, but it's telling you something important. And if on top of anger, you then have shame or guilt, self loathing, saying, oh, I shouldn't be angry. I'm a bad person for being angry. How many more negative emotions is that stacking on top of what's already an awful, awful feeling, being anger? So she says it's really important to be compassionate with yourself when you're angry and to let yourself be angry for as long as you need to. Um, might be a couple years, even. I was angry at my dad for 47 years, actually. It took really long, and I forgave him about like 3 or 4 years ago. I won't go into that story because it may come up later. I don't know. It's kind of long. But I was gentle with myself, and the anger didn't feel good toward my dad. But I couldn't forgive him for certain things that happened when we were kids. But then eventually I did. And so I think it's really important. Something, have any of you ever did this? When I was a kid, I I loved fuchsias, the fuchsia, that purple and pink flower. And so there were some blooming, but they hadn't opened. And then so I went, I was like, oh, I would really like to see that flower open. So I went and I opened it. And I ruined it. I destroyed the flower. And that was such a great lesson because I realized that we're like that. We're like that flowers and we don't know. We have to wait until we can stop being angry, at somebody. And we can apply all these different techniques, to hasten it. But we are part of nature. It really relates to what I was just saying. We are part of nature and we're like a flower. And when it's time to bloom, then that will happen. And it's beautiful when it happens. And you can hasten it with certain practices. One of the things I learned from Elaine Jackson, who I think is going to come and talk here. She's one of my teachers and friends, a wonderful, wonderful, humble, realized person, a student of Lama Yeshe Lama Zopa. And she taught me the antidote to being angry at my wife that she has for her husband. She says whenever she starts to feel anger at her husband, she thinks to herself, but he loves me more than anyone in the world, and he's my best friend. And so now that's my mantra. Like that's what I think every time I start to get angry at my wife. You, that's what they say, like paste on the opposite. So I just think, but she loves me more than anyone in the world, and she's my best friend. And it's true. That is 100% true. She is definitely my best friend. She definitely loves me more than anyone in the world because she's seen me. She's seen all my negative qualities, all my worst moments, and we're still together. And she's dedicated, half her life to me. Like, of course, she loves me more than anyone in the world. So anyway, it's useful to come up with a mantra like that, especially for the people in your immediate life. And also, like, I notice for myself, like, how kooky anger is because I actually find it quite easy not to be angry at Donald Trump. I look at the causes, the conditions, how he was raised. If I had a father that told me I was nothing, only material accumulation mattered, and every time I did achieve something, he belittled it, I would end up the same way. I would end up the same way. So I have no problem. I don't think I've ever really felt angry toward Donald Trump. But then I feel angry at my wife, who's much nicer than Donald Trump, much more highly evolved. How ridiculous is that? How ridiculous is that? It just, there's so many ways to see that anger is diluted. It really helps to go through these thought processes. Um, with attachment, thinking about the faults of attachment, um, there are many, and we'll do them in meditation. But I wanted to say something that I came to realize myself. One of the benefits of meditating and going through these processes of analytical meditation is you really do become much more self-aware, at least. Even if you can't stop your anger, you can see more clearly what it's doing. And so I tried to do the same with attachment, like to look when I finally get something I really, really, really crave. I started looking at how do I feel? And if I feel good, what is it that actually feels good? So I started to do that, you know. And what I started to realize is actually a lot of times what felt good after I got my object of attachment is that for a moment I was free from craving. It was actually what felt really great is that I was free from craving. It wasn't that I got the thing. I mean, the thing does feel nice, right? But if I was really honest with my mind, like, oh, wow, that's what it is actually. Now I feel good because I don't feel, it felt really bad having that craving. And now that I don't have it, like set aside how I got rid of that craving. In this case, I got rid of it by satisfying it. But then now that I don't have that craving, that's why I feel good. And then of course it lets you think, well, then, maybe I don't always have to satisfy that thing. Maybe there's ways to address the craving itself rather than because satisfying it can lead to a lot of other problems too, depending on how you satisfy it. Then the last thing about antidotes is to become brave enough to see the benefits of life's problems. Um, I had a friend who got in a car crash, and he was quite serious. And then it was a while after we got together for lunch, and I was prepared to come and, just offer him a lot of compassion and so on. And I started with that when I saw him. I said, "Oh my gosh, this must be because so many terrible things happened to him. Like he was running a company and he couldn't do that anymore. The whole company dissolved and they lost a lot of money and investments and had to fire everybody. He was in so much pain that his relationship broke up. That's one of the saddest things, when people get physically injured, sometimes it just breaks up your relationship because you can't a lot of psychological problems come out of that. So he lost his partner. Then he was like on unemployment, like he lost his apartment, he ran out of money. So many terrible things happened to him. So I was expecting, to offer him some compassion and maybe even, financial help or something. But he came down and he was so happy. He said, he's like, no, he's like, don't feel sorry for me. He said, this is like the best thing that ever happened to me. Like, what are you talking about? He said, I was a jerk. He said, I was really a jerk. And I don't think I could have become a kind person without this happening. He's like, this really shook up my life. And my partner was right to leave me because I was a jerk to her. And the company, I was so competitive and such a bad manager, and I kind of deserved to fall. He's like, but now, because my pain is so severe, he's like, I've had to just focus on taking care of my body, taking care of my mind, going to yoga, meditation, taking responsibility for my feelings, how I treat other people. So I was pretty blown away by his response. And of course, we'd never wish suffering on anybody, right? We never say, oh, you're having problems. Well, you know, go break a leg and you'll feel better. No, of course not. Like you would never wish the suffering on anybody. But when it does occur to us, it can be a great engine for transformation and self-growth. And I mean, how many of us would say one of the worst things that happened to us in our life was one of the greatest places that we grew? Very, very many of us. Um, Divorce, accidents, so on. So Lama Zopa was a bit extreme, like he would, I don't think any of us were on this level. People would come to him and say, I got cancer. And he'd say, great. I'm sorry, but I'm not ready. I'm not quite ready for that. I mean, this is where, advanced teachers are way ahead of us because they can know when it's effective to say that. I don't think I can. I don't think most of us can. But after the fact, you can decide for yourself. I think it's something you can decide for yourself that, yeah, I know people who say that actually, that cancer was the most transformative thing in their life. And you see people like that who've gone through deep tragedies, like their engagement and some of them, their engagement and dedication and purpose in life is so strong and so beautiful. Um, the last thing I'll say about this before we do the meditation is that my friend Sujata Baliga, who maybe will come teach here sometime, or has she come? No, no. She and I teach at Kyoto Foundation. We're kind of the two main meditation teachers there. She's um, she suffered childhood sexual abuse. Her father sexually abused her, and it was ruining her life for obvious reasons. And so in her 20s, early 20s, she had all the problems you might expect of someone like that. She had like substance problems, problems with anger, um, inappropriate relationships, and all these kind of things. And she went to India. She's Indian, actually. She's Indian American. So she went to India and was going on a kind of spiritual tour. And someone told her, "Oh, you can go meet with the Dalai Lama. You can go meet with His Holiness Dalai Lama." She's like, "Go ask him your question about how do you deal with your anger." And so she found out she really could. So she went to Dharamsala. She talked to the person who arranges the meetings. She got a meeting with His Holiness Dalai Lama. And she went in and started telling him all about her abuse, her father, her feelings, like her struggles. And she asked him how to get over it. And he listed many of the things that I just listed here about anger and its drawbacks and some of the antidotes. And she kept pushing back. And then finally, His Holiness said to her, "Have you been angry long enough?" Which sounds like a pretty rude thing to say, actually, doesn't it? But, it depends who's saying it. And she just sat there for a minute and she thought, yeah. She thought, yeah, actually, I have been angry for long enough. I would like you said, anger doesn't feel good. I would like to be free of that. And I will try the things that you suggested. So it totally transformed her life. And she went to law school. She became a lawyer. She became a restorative justice active advocate. She became someone who speaks constantly to people who've suffered the same types of abuse or worse. She leads meditations in forgiveness that hopefully she could lead here sometime. She won a MacArthur Award, the Genius Award. So her life was transformed by that meeting with His Holiness, and it turned her life into one of extraordinary benefit and joy. She's also one of the most joyful people that I know. Just you love spending time with this person, just so delightful. So anyway, for most of us, that's getting over something much worse than we've dealt with. Have you been angry long enough? Incredible question that I would never ask. I don't think I would ever ask anybody that. Okay, so let's get into the meditation then on letting go of suffering. So settle yourself back into meditation posture. We're all still in meditation session. There's these different levels of meditation, and one of them is listening, others contemplating, and then the more formal meditation on the cushion. So adjust your legs, feet, spine, half close your eyes, put your hands in that nice supportive posture. And let's just focus on our breath for a minute in order to calm and still stabilize our mind. And then remain in meditation as we move into analytical meditation on suffering. So the first form of suffering, it's called the suffering of suffering. Personally, I find a hard time doing this without a tinge of compassion. It does get overwhelming merely to empathize. So that might help you too, to have that backdrop of wishing to take it away. But reflect on the billions of people who don't have enough to eat every day, who lack clean water and a safe place to live. Think about the physical pain that so many of us feel right now, the suffering of sickness, from colds to cancer. Think of the sufferings of war, Middle East, and Ukraine, and other places around the world. It helps to be very specific, think of specific guys in trenches, and drone coming, buzzing over a Russian soldier's head, about to blow them up. This is happening right now. Think of the suffering of imprisonment. Think of the suffering of oppression in various countries and between various peoples and groups of people. Think of the natural suffering of aging as our bodies wear out, some of us feeling that more than others. Think about everyday forms of suffering, like not getting what we want, getting what we don't want, the suffering of loneliness. You can think of the instability of our reputation, our job, our relationships, and the anxiety and competitiveness we feel from life's pressures. And again, it helps to color this with a little compassion, or it can get overwhelming, wanting to take it away from ourselves and from others. So some suffering we can actively oppose, while other forms are unavoidable. And by acknowledging the suffering that we and others experience, we not only expand compassion, but we also prepare ourselves better for the problems that we'll inevitably face in the future. Next, we meditate on the suffering of change, experiences we ordinarily call pleasures. So impermanence demands that everything we enjoy wears out or breaks down. Everything that begins also ends. Our phones, our cars, our homes, even civilization itself. One time I looked up the average duration of a civilization, and it was about 300 years. But even before things wear out, our minds can change. We get tired of the fancy phone that we excitedly unboxed last year. Or we get annoyed with partners who we thought would make us happy forever. So our feelings are unstable. Sometimes our relationships or our homes or other durable things do last a lifetime. But then we still have to accept that when we die, we lose these too. Now, we don't meditate on the necessity of loss to bring us down, which it can, but to motivate us to live the most meaningful life possible right now. Because when we realize that everything changes, it helps us to not sweat the small stuff and to be more present for life's impermanent pleasures and fleeting relationships. I read a quote from, believe it or not, from Cher recently, who said, a very wise thing. She said, if it doesn't matter in 5 years, it doesn't matter. Very wise. So now we explore the source of suffering, our delusions of attachment, anger, ignorance. Attachment is when we exaggerate the positive in someone or something. When we look at a product or a person or an achievement, and all we can think about is how it's going to make us happy. And that maybe we can't be happy unless we get it. So bring to mind an object of strong attachment for you. It could be a person, an achievement, a thing, some amount of money, a change in a political leader. So how does your mind see this object of strong attachment? Do you believe that if you got it, you'd be truly happy? Whether it's some amount of money, someone to love you, or some change in the world. So ask yourself if this is a realistic view. Ask yourself whether your attachment goes beyond healthy goals to become an agitated state of mind that can't be satisfied unless it gets what it wants, even if it's something you find very beneficial, like a new president or something like that. Still, do you see how your mind might be agitated in not having that thing? So, an antidote to the strong craving we feel with attachment is to consider the flaws of the object, the thing that you want. If it's a person, ask yourself, will this person always please you? Will this thing you want work as well as you hope and make you as happy as you imagine? Especially with expensive, fancy things or like a new car. How will you feel if it gets damaged or stolen, puts you into debt, forces you to work longer and harder? And if a political leader changes, will everything really be perfect when the one you wanted to get elected was. Did that solve all the problems? And what are the drawbacks even of success, wealth, fame? Very successful people, one of the saddest things is they don't know who their friends are. Most of the people around them are just friends to their wealth and success and fame, and not to them. It can be nice to think of the suffering of very famous and wealthy people. See that they suffer, and sometimes much more than we do. Bring yourself back to whatever object of strong attachment you find useful right now, and think what problems it might lead to in your life. Does your happiness really depend on getting it? So, anger is when you see an object, a person, an experience, and all you can think of is the negative. You exaggerate its power to harm and can't see any good in it at all. Bring someone to mind who you're angry with, a colleague, a family member, politician, business person, someone in the world who you feel is harming you or harming others, who you might even consider your enemy. Do you see any good in this person at all? Or does your mind project only harm and annoyance? So, as we try to apply antidotes to anger at this person, ask yourself, is it possible that many people love and respect this person that you're angry with? Your enemy's mother, their children, their colleagues, their friends. You might feel your mind just resisting and not wanting to admit this, but it's true. Does this person also do good things as well as bad? Do they help as well as harm? Try to put yourself in the other person's shoes for a moment. It might be difficult, but seen from their perspective, do your enemy's actions make sense to them? And does your enemy feel painful delusions also? Going even deeper, could this person's behavior help you to lessen your own anger by giving you the opportunity to practice patience every day and the antidotes to anger? We want to become patient, so don't we need people to try our patience? And if we had a more unbiased insight into our enemy's behavior, wouldn't that even help us better oppose the harm that that person does in the world? Having this insight into what makes them tick. Then we look at the delusion of ignorance, ignorance of the true causes of happiness and suffering, ignorance that forgets how things are always changing, ignorance of your interdependent equality with others. So, without judgment, ask yourself honestly, whether you think I'm just a little more important than everyone else. My problems, my suffering, my needs, my relationships. Or do you feel the opposite? That you're a little or a lot less important than others? And then ask whether either of these biased ways of seeing yourself might be at the root of your suffering. So, is it possible to see yourself in a balanced way, not more important or less important than others, but equally deserving of happiness and freedom from suffering? Look at the flaws of anger and attachment. Does getting angry feel good? Each time you get angry, does it increase the chance you'll become angry again? When you're patient or forgiving, what habits does that build in your mind? When you feel attachment, is it energizing or agitating? So, what habits form when you feel contentment rather than craving? How much control do you really have over reality, people, and the planet compared to the control you have over your own mind? By gaining control over your own mind, can you find a more stable source of happiness an even more stable ground from which to genuinely help others. Now, at least in this tradition, we're taught that unless your objects of attachment and anger are causing you real harm, letting go of these delusions doesn't require a parting from the objects of attachment and anger themselves. So when you stop exaggerating the joys of food, sex, entertainment, or relationships, you may actually enjoy them a lot more, realistically appreciating their permanent pleasures. And when you let go of anger's exaggeration, do you see more clearly that people's actions stem from causes and conditions that began long ago? Can you see how their actions, however misguided, make sense to them? And that a powerful path to resolving conflicts is one of genuine understanding. And then is it even possible to see the benefits of difficult experiences? That they offer you the opportunity to strengthen your patience and kindness and forgiveness and non attachment. So, as we start to ease out of the meditation on letting go of suffering, you can set an intention in daily life to watch your attachment more mindfully, becoming aware of the drawbacks of craving, and choosing healthier ways of responding or not responding to your urges. And also set an intention to notice how your everyday anger may exaggerate the negative aspects of others. Don't they also do good and kind things? And aren't their minds also subject to delusions? And then you can ease out of the meditation. Does anybody want to reflect on any questions or comments or observations about suffering, its causes? There's a lot to say about this topic. That you're particularly angry about.
Thank you. When it came to the universal nature of suffering and how we perceive that, and a definition in the words that don't exist in our culture, what came to me is it's the blues. And what people don't understand about the blues, who don't know where it came from or how it evolved or how it is used, it's not feeling sad about what has happened. It's about feeling good in spite of, and it's about moving beyond. And so, to me, I almost consider myself a Buddhist.
I think that's really, really wise. And it's funny, music keeps coming up. I found out you're a musician too, right? I think the and we were Shankar, Venerable Shankar and I were talking about this too. It's um, music's an extraordinary vehicle, I think, for understanding all the aspects of reality. If you use it skillfully like that, yeah, the blues. I also too, I love kind of happy songs about sad things, like for me, I like the blues too, but in the 80s, I grew up in the 80s, so I like new wave music. And there's a band called New Order I particularly like, where their songs are they sound very happy, but the words are very sad. And I loved that. I just thought there's something amazing about something. And yeah, you're right. It's kind of like a modern blues, like any song that has that dissonance between a pleasurable, happy sound about a difficult topic. Yeah, I think that's very wise. Very, very wise.
Would you comment on the idea of righteous anger?
Uh-oh. Righteous anger. Righteous anger. Comment on the idea of righteous anger. Um, everything's about definitions, right? What does righteous mean? What does angry mean? I think something, even before righteous, is just acknowledging that it is anger, So, I mean, the first step is just like, okay, I'm angry. Um, I mean, in a way, there's part of every anger that's righteous because, and also, I don't usually talk about Vajrayana topics, but there's um there's a wisdom they say that accompanies every delusion, and the one for anger is the mirror-like wisdom, right? It's like seeing things really clearly. That underlying anger is extraordinary clarity of like this is wrong. So it seems to me that part of there's part of every anger that's righteous, that sees that something needs to change, like there's a wisdom underlying it. And then in general, there's a part of every anger that's deluded, that then exaggerates the negative in the thing. Um, there isn't a person on earth who doesn't have like people that love or love them and that does some good things. Even people you think of, even like Vladimir Putin, he's not doing awful things all day long. Like a lot of it is actually quite pleasant things, and many of his people are quite happy with him. And they have an extraordinary welfare state in Russia. As part of why the country continues to support him because people can get inexpensive loans and good jobs and high quality goods and things like that. Also, they have a value in communism, however cynical you might say, that you shouldn't own things. Which is kind of a nice attitude that everybody should have access to things. And then he has his family and friends, and so like so much of what he does actually isn't awful every day, although some of it is. Uh, so yeah, I think, but I think for a highly, they say even His Holiness gets angry, like Thupten Jinpa, because he spent so much time with His Holiness, so it's fun to ask him what's His Holiness like. Like he's like, oh yeah, he gets angry, he gets sad, but it just flows through him. It's like a waterfall or like a child. I notice it's amazing. My daughter, I see this. If any of you have children, I don't know if all children are like this, but I think a lot of them are. And mine is. She'll be so angry. She'll even say, "You're the worst dad in the world" to me. Sometimes I'm not, definitely not. She's like, "You're the worst daddy in the world," and then like 1 minute later, she's like, "I love you so much. You're the best daddy. I love you so much." And like I think that's actually how we're meant to, that it just flows right through. Like the Dalai Lama, he still feels anger. And he even says I feel some, I don't know if he's just saying it to be nice, but he even says he feels some like craving of seeing a beautiful, attractive woman's body or something. He says that. I don't know if it's really true, but that it just flows through him. So I think that's the thing is to accept it. Um, but then when people say like it's okay to do something very harmful to another person or group, because of anger. I think sometimes you hear that phrase, righteous anger, or a just war. Some people use that term, just war, which is, I think, maybe an oxymoron. Um, I think perhaps that level of interpreting those words would be seen as delusional. It's never a good idea to kill anybody in general. Like we were talking about this yesterday. Violence is so normalized in our society that even nice, gentle people like us and our friends, we say, oh yeah, I guess we just have to go kill a few 100,000 Russians to solve this problem. Like, boy, is that a shame. But it just seems like that's the only solution in this case. It's not the case. It's not the case. So I think like that type of, if you interpret righteous anger as saying, I'm allowed to do something really bad and harmful to other people, depriving them of their rights and even their life in the name of my anger. No, I don't think it's righteous. But is any of that what you meant by righteous anger? Does any of that bear on what you're saying, or do you mean something else?
That's probably good enough.
Okay, okay. I think about it a lot. I think about it a lot because I get angry too.
Amanda, go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Hi there. So this question is a little bit, it's not exactly on the topic, but it sort of is. I was also raised as a Christian Scientist. In fact, I was still a member of the Mother Church until quite recently. And you probably know the expression to know the truth. When you have to know the truth about something, you know that phrase.
And the truth shall set you free.
That set you free.
Yeah.
So, my mother, like perhaps your parents, when something would go wrong, they would tell me I needed to know the truth. And so if something hadn't got fixed, then I needed to know the truth some more. So I found that I've incorrectly brought this into my practice of Buddhism, so that my practice has this element of forcedness of trying to know the truth. I'm going to do this practice and then I'm going to get enlightened. And in other words, myself, mortal mind, or my human sense of self is the one like powering the engine. And I found that I had to kind of stop doing that, and instead this idea of creating merit sort of trickled through to my thought, and I thought that's what sort of helped me try and move away from this human drive of getting enlightened. So instead to do things that create merit, like prostrations, water bowls, all these things that are dreary and boring and you don't really feel very special, you just keep doing it. And it's kind of weird because it seems to sort of help. It's like merit does actually bring some sort of mental change. And I was wondering if you could comment on any of that stuff.
Yeah, sure. So the problem I found with at least the way that I was taught to practice Christian Science is that on the one hand, it says everyone's perfect and beautiful. It's almost like Buddha nature, fundamental goodness. But then in practice, the way it seemed to manifest was, oh, you're sick. Something's wrong with you. You're thinking wrong. Like you're sick because of thoughts that you're having right now that are bad and wrong. And I really found that to be unhelpful and quite negative, having it with negative thoughts about myself, that I'm like a bad person because I'm sick. That as soon as I get sick or even have an injury or stub my toe, that means there's a problem with my mind. That's how I was kind of taught in some version. And I think a lot of people in Christian Science are instructed that way. And so, yeah, I can understand what you're saying, because if you think something's wrong with you, if if something physically goes wrong with you, or if you feel a delusion or whatever, that's just piling self-hatred on top of a delusion you're already having. And yeah, I found that Christian Science, again, the way that I learned it, really lacked an explanation of how you treat other people. It was very, very focused internally on, somehow like shifting your own mind in some ways in this very forceful, tense way, like you're talking about. So yeah, I think when you relax into whatever you're actually feeling and just accept it, and then find beneficial actions that steer yourself to a healthy mind. Yeah, that seems like a very effective practices. And sometimes, yeah, in Buddhism, this thing of creating merit is a bit. It goes beyond sort of what I talk about in How to Train a Happy Mind, because this is very logical. Um, the way this book works, it talks very much about the logic, but with merit, it goes a little bit beyond logic, doesn't it? Because like Venerable Rene says, if you've been practicing for a long time and you're not making progress, he says, try doing some of these merit-making activities like making mandala offerings, doing preliminary practices, and so on. And I think there's just an extraordinary power in ritual, and those might be different for different people. I mean, your ritual might be going for a run every morning, or going out camping in the mountains, or working in a homeless shelter, or whatever it is. But yeah, I think finding the rituals for yourself that heal your mind, heal your body, is particularly important. When I used to feel bad about myself, sometimes I go out and I buy a chicken and go give it to a homeless person, because I thought, oh, this is a healthy, nourishing, high protein thing. Even though I was vegetarian, like get a chicken and go give it to somebody. So yeah, I think, yeah, when you feel stuck in your practice, I think creating merit absolutely is beneficial. And if you're Buddhist, then we know these very specific activities to do it. But I think in general, it relates to some form of ritual or another, finding some form of ritual, or, even like the Vajrasattva, or the secular purifying meditation. Um, I don't know. Does anybody else want to reflect on that? Venerable Shanka, I don't know if you have any insights on, if you want to say on what you do a lot of this collecting merit, I notice. So. Merit collecting activities.
Well, I mean, you're talking to a believer, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not sure I have anything particularly enlightening to say, but I think that just some of these, somehow it transforms your mind. I don't know how it works. Sometimes there's a lot of resistance to doing it, at least I feel it. But if I do it, there's this feeling of, I don't know, joy, or feeling of just, like real accomplishment that comes. Like, I'll give an example. I try to do the Lama Chopa, every morning, right? For those of you, that's the Guru Puja that we do on soak days here specifically. And, and I do it with as Rinpoche says to do it, right? So that takes like 3 hours, 2.5 hours, right? Maybe at least 3 hours. Yeah. So, if you do the meditations and stop in the middle and all that stuff. And so some days it's just like, I get up at 5 and I'm like, oh God, I can't get myself to do it, But if I force myself to do it, there's something extraordinary that happens. They talk about the Guru's blessings that come, and yeah, I don't know how it works. As Venerable Rene said, it just works.
Yeah.
There's something transformative about it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think I will diverge from the purely secular approach now too, just to reflect myself, because when I did there are all these preliminary practices that we're encouraged to do in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. And one of them is a Vajrasattva retreat where you do like 100,000. Actually, it's 110,000, because they have the quality assurance. I love how because we know it. If you're ever in, if you're in business, if you've done like software or make products, there's quality assurance. Like they test things and also they make 10% more because they know they make mistakes. So that's what this is. Instead of 100,000, you actually have to do 110,000 or so because they know that you'll skip them or make mistakes. So I call it the quality assurance for your retreat mantra accumulation. But yeah, I felt that in my practice at a certain point. Like, why aren't I making practices? I have, great teachers, been practicing for a while. So I finally did that Vajrasattva preliminary, and I felt it had a very, very big effect on my mind. Like, and I did it, I didn't take a month off. I did it like at home, just like session in the morning, session in the evening. I don't know what it took, like 3 or 4 months. But I found it had an extraordinary effect. So much so that I did another one a few years later, a couple years later. I did another because it was so, and I loved it. It was just fantastic. So I want to just say, like, from my own experience too, and certain things when I ask Venerable Rene, like, oh, this isn't going that well, like he'll say things like, oh, are you reading the Heart Sutra every morning? I was like, no. It's like, oh, you should be doing that. So I did recently, I think a year ago. I hadn't been, I mean, I have so many practices like a lot of you, right? So that one just slid on. So now I went back and started reading the Heart Sutra again every morning. And yeah, very, very big impact. So yeah, I am a Buddhist, I think that's the first sentence in this book is I am a Buddhist. And the second one is, but the purpose isn't to make you a Buddhist. But for those asking these questions, like Buddhist questions, yeah, there's something we can't explain that does really work. But I asked Venerable Rene about all the different preliminaries, and he told me really honestly from his perspective that some of them didn't feel like they had that impact to him, like all the prostrations and things. Like he's like, I did it, and then I don't know. And then it's hard on my body. And then some people, of course, it does. Like Cuban Cancer Rinpoche is doing prostrations every day. So yeah, I think it also depends on your own mind. And most of us don't have the time to do all of these the way that they did in Tibet. So you may need to choose the one or two or three that work best for you and be relaxed. Don't beat yourself up if you didn't do every preliminary in the amount that they say in our tradition. Some of the other traditions are different too, because I've done retreats in the Karma Kagyu tradition, and they actually gave you 10,000 of everything instead of 100,000 of everything as your preliminary, which was better for a person with a family and a job can much more easily do that. So yeah, I agree, and I think Venerable Shanka and many others do. Yeah, please.
To your point about not, like not everything works necessarily, right? Which is absolutely true. But one way that I figured out that you can tell what is going to work is the one that you have the most resistance to. No, it's serious.
Yeah.
And and those of you who had Lama Zopa Rinpoche in your life, when I asked him what I should do, he gave me exactly the things that I didn't want to do.
Yeah.
And those are the things that made the difference.
This is really true, right? The things you feel really strong resistance about in life are often the ones you need to head right towards. Any other questions though on suffering? And I hope that was helpful about the Christian Science and accumulating merit. There's a lot to say about it.
It was great. Thank you.
Sure. Any other? Yeah. Does somebody else have a question or comment on suffering?
Are there any more
Delusion.
comments on the Zoom?
There's a wonderful, well, then I'll share a couple other things because we have 10 minutes. There's a wonderful quote from Shantideva I often think about that he said, you can either pave the world with leather or you can put on a pair of shoes. Have any of you heard that? There's so many. This is the one book I would bring to a desert island is the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. So you need to hear a commentary on it from somebody to pull it apart. But once you have, then the little verses just come to life. It's such an extraordinary guide to the Bodhisattva's way of life, or the Bodhisattva Charyavatara by Shantideva. So he says, if you can either pave the world with leather or you can put on a pair of shoes. Isn't it such a vivid image about as to suffering, you know? Because a lot of us are trying to pave the world with leather, if we're honest. Oh, if only we do this, if only we do that, only like I'll be happy once we have this leader and this much money spent on climate change and all these good things, you know, me too. Like they're not necessarily bad things. But is that an obstacle to your own happiness? And won't you be more effective at changing the world if you put on a pair of shoes, you know, rather than trying to pave the world with leather? I don't know, I'm a very visual person, so it just in my mind it's so clear, like the whole world's covered with like stitched together leather. You know how ridiculous and impossible that is. That's what we face with our delusions, anger especially. If there aren't any other questions, I will then share this story for 7 minutes that might be useful about my dad. Because he was physically abusive to me when I was a kid. And I was really angry at him for it. You know, it's so awful. You can explain it really well when you're an adult. It's like, wow, I'm in a family with a person who's supposed to protect me, and I'm scared of them. You know, I don't know where to go to. It's so awful. So then when I got older, I left my family when I was about 15 years old. And but I needed my family's support still. I would work in the summers and then have enough money to kind of pay through the year. In my life, I was living with a friend, but I ran out of money one year and I asked my dad for $100 when I was 15. And he said no. So then I vowed I'm never going to give my dad any money. And I kept that vow, even as I became a Buddhist, you know, and had the Bodhisattva vow, you know, to benefit everybody, you know, except my dad. But I just couldn't let go of the anger. It's like I was that closed flower, you know, I wasn't ready to open. And even being Buddhist practitioner for 20, now it's 25 years, but it was, I don't know, 21 years or something. And my dad would always come to me asking for money. It was a very poor investment he made because I ended up doing pretty well as a person in life. And he would come to me like, oh, can I have $10,000? I need $20,000. My dad's gone bankrupt like 4 times. Always, no, nope. I made a vow never to give you any money. And I guess that overrides my Bodhisattva vow. I made it earlier or something. So, you know, I confronted my dad with all these things in my 20s. I said, oh, you know, you beat me, you did this, you left us, you didn't give me $100. And actually, he said, you know, I was a different person. He said, he's like, I wasn't even self-aware. He said, I don't even remember doing those things. He's like, I believe you that I did those things, but I don't even remember it. And he didn't apologize, but he just said, I was a different person. And, you know, I'm a different person now. And I love you. And that wasn't enough for me at the time. Like, whatever. But it didn't inflame. I think it was quite skillful because it didn't inflame a conflict between us, but it didn't heal either. So it went on for years and years and years. Always, you know, I'm never going to help my dad. About 4 years ago, as the tail end of COVID or whatever, 3 years ago, I went to visit him and I hadn't seen him for a long time. And I was just kind of open to what would happen. I wouldn't say I was trying to reconcile, but I hadn't seen him in so long. I thought, okay, I want to go see my dad and see what happens. I went to see him and, you know, he said, oh, he's like, I love you so much. He's like, I've always loved you so much. You're my favorite child. You know, you're not supposed to say that. But it's like, you're my favorite child. And it's like, I'm always telling my friends about you. I'm so proud of you. And then we met some of his friends. And I met the friends. They said, oh, your dad's always saying how much he loves you, how proud he is of you, you know, how you're his favorite child. So we were, what was happening is my dad is really bad with money and he's really destitute actually. And he's living in a place where they have no good rent controls. And he had been evicted from a couple places. I was kind of worried. I was looking at my dad. I talked to my dad honestly. I was like, "What are you scared of?" He's like, "Because he was having trouble sleeping." I was like, "Why can't you sleep?" He said, "Oh, I'm scared. I'm scared I'm gonna get. I have no money. I'm scared I'm just gonna be homeless." So the last day we were there, we were walking along and we saw an open house sign, and it was in this place with a beach, an open house pointing in. I was like, "This is interesting. You can walk from the beach in." So I said, "Let's check it out." And then when we were in there, I just had this urge, and I asked the realtor. I said, "Is there any way here that we could buy a place with a loan, put down 20%, where my dad could live in one unit and it would make enough to break even?" And the guy said, "Oh yeah, there's still places here like that. Could we see some?" My dad is just like looking at me like, you know. So it's kind of a long story, but we ended up buying my dad a place to live for the rest of his life. And it became a project for both of us. He's really good with construction. We got a place that needed some work. But it became this kind of, a lot of people cautioned me too. They're like, "Oh, I don't know if you want to get into that thing with your dad. But I said, no, it feels like the right thing to do now. And so I did it. And it has not been easy, by the way. It's difficult. It's all constantly difficult. It's way more complicated being this intimate with my dad and, having things we need to fix and differences about money and so on. But it just felt so good. It just felt so good to forgive him and just accept, like, hey, he isn't that person. I'm the only person in the world who believes this story. He doesn't even remember it. It's over. It was bad when I was a kid, but I have a nice life now, and he is very gentle and he loves me. Maybe he's going to live another 10 years. What do I want out of those 10 years? He wants to love me. He wants to be loved. I want to be loved, and I want to love him. And so it happened. The flower opened, you know, and it feels so much better. And I wouldn't force that on anybody. With anybody, you may need to wait 47 years like I did, but it's I feel so good. It feels so much better not being angry, right? And beyond that, of loving him and being loved and just accepting he hasn't changed. I mean, he's not violent, but his other flaws that I perceive are still there. But it was the right thing to do. And then it was the right time to do it. So was my anger righteous? I mean, it was justified, but it was hurting me only. It wasn't hurting anybody else, only me. And then when I got rid of it and then replace it with love and generosity, I felt so great about myself. So that's a lot of how I make decisions now is like, how do I want to feel about myself when this person dies? How would I like to look back on this situation? And when I thought about that, oh, I would like to look back at this and having forgiven and being loved and to be loved. So that's the last story. It's possible to give up anger, but it might take 47 years. It only took Sujata, like 10 or something, 12, 15. Amazing for something much worse. Okay, may all the merits from this conversation and our meditations ripen into our own minds, evolving past anger and attachment at just the right pace that we each need, with gentleness and kindness toward ourselves and everyone around us. Thanks, everybody.